Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Salebox for the 19th of June 2015. My name is TotalBiscuit, rounding up today's daily Steam deals. If you missed yesterday's, you can find the video on my channel, and they will be down there for the next 20 or so hours. Alright, let's kick it off, shall we, with Dragon Ball Xenoverse. I think that if you happen to be a fan of this franchise, you've already looked at this, and if you're not, there's not that many reasons to. I mean, it's kind of a Dragon Ball fan's wet dream in many ways. Character creation, the ability to train under popular and legendary characters. It's got a pseudo MMO feel to it. You can wander around a big world doing all sorts of different things. And it does run at 60 FPS, which previous Dragon Ball games haven't. So it's always nice to see that. However, if you are not already into Dragon Ball and understand what the hell's going on, there's really not that much of a reason to pick it up, and that should be fairly obvious, I would imagine. If you do fancy running around a large Dragon Ball world, collecting items, doing side quests, grinding away, and fighting famous folk, then yeah, sure, why not? It's definitely not a bad port, which is surprising. There's a little bit of an issue with multi-monitor support. You might find that some of the more unusual resolutions are gonna mess with the UI a bit, but otherwise it's actually pretty solid, all things considered. So if you're into Dragon Ball, yeah, why not dip into it? Although the DLC is unfortunately not on sale, so it's going to cost you quite a bit if you wish to grab all of that. The Resident Evil franchise. Lots and lots of games in this particular collection, and some of them not particularly well discounted, and then some of them that are well discounted that also happen to be terrible, like Resident Evil 6, which is not very good at all. This is a pretty good chance to pick up the Biohazard HD remaster, i.e. Resident Evil Remake. It is only 25% off, but it wasn't that expensive to begin with, and that is a really solid port for what it is, and of course it's the classic Resident Evil. You've then got Resident Evil 4, which is the HD version, so it's a little bit better. The original release of this on PC was absolutely awful, so this is a much better option if you haven't had a chance to play that one yet. Avoid Raccoon City. It's abysmal and there's no player base for it anyway. It was a co-op shooter and it wasn't very good at the best of times. So I would certainly suggest grabbing 4 and grabbing the remaster as well. 5's okay if you've got a co-op partner, although a lot of people didn't necessarily like that one. And then you've also got Revelations, which is actually not that bad, surprisingly enough. Bit of a return to form, really, when it comes to more classic Resident Evil gameplay as opposed to Resident Evil 6 nonsense QTE gameplay, and it is a pretty good port with full mouse support and all that good stuff, so not a bad little selection if you're looking for some survival horror here, and some pretty decent discounts. Age of Empires 2 HD, certainly worth picking up if you're interested in playing the single-player campaigns. I mean, it's a no-brainer in that respect, and the discount on this is ludicrously good. Like, it's very, very cheap. I wouldn't exactly call it a great HD remake. They hardly tried. They mostly just zoomed in for the most part. They supposedly enhanced the visual engine, but they didn't touch the animations. They didn't really upscale anything too well. They didn't redo anything. It just looks a little bit shinier. The online play had some problems for quite some time. They have improved that quite a bit. But for the single player, it's absolutely worthwhile. Bear in mind, they've still been patching this. I'll give them a lot of credit. They did actually put a lot of work into this after the original release, which was a mess when it came to online play. However, a fairly large caveat, the recent patch caused a bunch of problems for a lot of people. Some people are claiming that there's now an FPS cap, they're claiming there's massive lag in the game, that they lost their scenarios and save game files, and that the mods stopped working. That's not too good. That's not too good. If you want to grab it, then I'd recommend trying to use the beta menu to grab the 3.9 version instead. Otherwise, you might be having some problems. TheHunter Primal. Don't even bother. They basically ran off and abandoned this one. It was in early access. It was looking like it was maybe going to turn out to be a reasonable dinosaur survival shooter thingy, and then they just released it and ran off. Simple as that. After a long period of inactivity, they did come back and provide some token updates, but a lot of users are still complaining about a lack of content from this game, so it may very well not be worthy of your time. I know dinosaurs certainly sound very tempting, but I don't know if I'd trust this particular company when it comes to this, and the game is clearly not finished at this point. the Tropico series. Alright, so which one to recommend from this? Probably Tropico 4, on the basis that it's a hell of a lot cheaper than everything else. So, Tropico 4 is ludicrously cheap. Tropico 3 is even cheaper. So that might be worth picking up if you're just starting out. Thing is, between Tropico 3, 4, and 5, there are actually not that many differences. It's an extremely iterative series. The difference between Tropico 3 and 4 is very minor. Tropico 5 did add an interesting system into the game, which is the era system, where you go through 4 eras of time and technology. But ultimately, they all pretty much play the same. Tropico 5 is probably the best of the 3, based on the fact that it does have that era system and a decent amount of content, but it is also significantly more expensive. They've never been perfect games, but they're fairly enjoyable island management sims where you have to work to construct an island republic and rule over it as a benevolent, or indeed not so benevolent, dictator. Tropico 4 was a pretty obnoxious DLC fest. They released absurd amounts of DLC, which really didn't actually have a lot of content in them, although you can now pick up a collector's bundle, which is going to cost you almost nothing extra, and it's going to get you the expansion, which is Modern Times, and then all of the weird, crappy DLC, of which there were like 11 pieces of it. So that's actually a pretty good bet. It's a good time to get that and not have to pay, I think it was like $5 per building or some ludicrous nonsense like that. One way or the other, they're all fairly enjoyable games. They don't perform incredibly well, I've got to say. Tropico 5 had performance problems, although the older games should run pretty well by now. Kerbal Space Program, probably one of the best early access success stories up to this point. Not many can top it. It's all about designing rockets and running a space agency and sending Kerbals into space and completing various objectives, setting up bases on the moon and all sorts of things like that, traveling to other planets. And there are a huge amount of mods for this game as well to really keep the content going. It's pretty comedic, I have to say, in many ways. You can design stupid rockets that will invariably not work properly. And the progress of getting off the ground, getting into orbit, getting to the moon, building space stations, and all sorts of things like that is very rewarding indeed. I'd certainly recommend it to anyone that, 1, has the patience, 2, is able to laugh at their own failures, and 3, is really interested in starfaring physics, because that's what this game is based on. The Fallout franchise. Well, pretty much every game in this is worth it to some extent. Of course, even the older ones, which are absolute classics. Admittedly, they are showing their age these days, but they are pretty good. Don't bother with the classic collection, though, because it's actually pretty damn bad value in comparison to buying Fallout 1, 2, and Fallout Tactics individually. You've got Fallout 3 and then Fallout 3 Game of the Year Edition. Then you've got New Vegas Ultimate and regular New Vegas. Regular New Vegas is actually pretty damn good on its own, especially if you want to mod it a little bit. Ultimate Edition is okay. It does have some decent DLC, like Old World Blues, for instance, and then some stuff that's maybe not as good. And then Fallout 3 Game of the Year Edition comes with what is, in my opinion, a pretty essential piece of DLC, which is the Broken Steel expansion, which gives the game a proper frickin' ending. That game's DLC is a bit hit and miss. The Pit's good, Broken Steel's good, Point Lookout is okay, then things like Operation Anchorage is not that great, Mothership Zeta is ish. I mean, it's not terrible. But one way or the other, what you've got is a selection of post-apocalyptic RPGs. I personally preferred Vegas. I felt it had better writing, more interesting quests, and of course it has a bigger variety of weapons. And now that the bugs have mostly been sorted out, I think it is the superior product. Europa Universalis. Well, this is a series that I would love to get into if I had the time and the intelligence. I have neither of those things. It's a grand strategy from Paradox. It is extremely popular amongst those that enjoy grand strategy, and Europa Universalis 4 happens to also be on sale at a heavy discount. And as a result, it's probably worth just buying that as opposed to grabbing anything else. Although if you do want something a little bit cheaper, there's nothing necessarily wrong with Europa Universalis 3 either. If you want to know more about this game, don't ask me. Go and watch either Northern Lions videos or Quill18. He has some good videos on this particular topic. That should give you an impression of what to expect before you dive in. Huge amount of content available for this thing. It is incredibly in-depth, but it does have a little bit of a learning curve. Killing Floor 2. I have no doubt this game is going to be pretty damn good. The thing is, right now, it doesn't really have enough content to justify the purchase. It's currently in early access. They only have 4 out of the 10 classes in. They have a very limited selection of weapons and maps available, and as a result, I would personally hold off on this for the time being. It's looking like it is going to be really, really good, just like the original, but right now, I wouldn't. It is a horde-based multiplayer game, and if you want to play the original, which still has a very active player base, by the way, then you can get that pretty heavily discounted as well, and you probably should grab that. Although I have to say, the bundle is not that great value, unfortunately. Thankfully, most of the stuff in the bundle is cosmetic, so you don't necessarily need it, but I thought the original Killing Floor was a hell of a lot of fun. Killing Floor 2 will eventually be as good, if not better, I have no doubt, but right now in early access, it's not quite there yet. Stranded Deep. It's another early access survival game, and while it is a great looker with an interesting concept, you are surviving on a Pacific island, it doesn't have a great deal of content yet. It doesn't have a lot going for it in terms of objectives. It's also apparently a little bit too easy. For instance, the islands have too much food on them, so you can very easily collect as much food as you will ever need. And while it does give you the option to make a raft and go onto a new island, you can't take most of your stuff with you, so it's ultimately pointless to really do that. It seems like it's got a lot of potential eventually, and they do have a solid development roadmap for this game, but it's not done yet, and as a result, I would just recommend holding off on it. It's a nice concept, and it's a good start to a game, but you will find it pretty repetitive fairly quickly, because there really isn't that much to do once you've got set up with a little settlement, and you have everything that you need. The Saints Row series. Well, Saints Row 4 is more of a superhero game than it is a crime game, which might be a little bit surprising to you, but there it is. And it's very, very good. I mean, it's extremely funny. It's a hell of a lot of fun to play. And then you've got Get Out of Hell, which is sort of a expand alone based on that. That's maybe worth giving a pass to. It's okay. It's pretty fun. It lets you do things like fly around hell and, well, mostly fly around hell. It's basically a game consisting of side activities for the most part. It doesn't actually have that many main quests, although it does have its moments, like the musical. That's hilarious. That's absolutely fantastic. But I'd probably get Saints Row 4 Game of the Century Edition over Get Out of Hell because it's better value. It comes with all the DLC and it's got more content. Now, in terms of Saints Row the Third, that was a pretty solid game as well. Nothing really to complain about too much there, and Saints Row 2 was arguably the best if you were looking for really good side quests and side activities, and you were interested in it being just a little bit more grounded, because it was ultimately a little bit crazy when it got to Saints Row 3, and then things started to really jump the shark there. But if you do grab Saints Row 2, there may be performance issues out of the box, so you may wish to grab the Gentlemen of the Row mod, which consists of a number of tweaks and enhancements, which does make things a little bit better, but do bear in mind that this is still not a particularly good port, so you are going to perhaps run into some problems. The other games in the series run just fine though, so you're absolutely safe grabbing those. The Stanley Parable. This is a game that you've kind of got to experience to explain. I described it as a walking simulator because that's what this game actually involves, and most of the time I would say, ugh, walking simulators, but this one happens to be very funny, offer you multiple playthrough options, and there's all sorts of weird and interesting things to discover. As a result, especially at this price, this is highly recommended. There is bare minimum actual gameplay in it, but it's an experience. I'll certainly give it that. The Assassin's Creed franchise. Well, you can pick through this one, and the best one, at least in my honest opinion, would be Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. As you're probably well aware at this point, Unity was launched in a terrible state. It's a little bit better now, but the last time I tried to play it, with SLI enabled, all of the water textures flickered on and off to the point where I thought I might end up having a stroke. It wasn't great. Not a brilliant experience. Black Flag is certainly the better of the franchise, at least in my honest opinion. It did ditch some of the Assassin's Creed stuff in favor of piracy, which is a hell of a lot more fun. Unfortunately, the other half of the game is still Assassin's Creed stuff. That's a sad thing, isn't it? In order to be a good Assassin's Creed game, you've got to abandon what made Assassin's Creed. Yeah. If you would like to get a little bit of a taste of Black Flag, then Freedom Cry is an expand alone, so you can grab that one. Outside of that, you've got Liberation, which I didn't really rate that highly. It had some nice, interesting ideas behind it, but otherwise it was a fairly generic Assassin's Creed game. Assassin's Creed 3 was, I mean, it was okay. And then you've got the classic stuff where you've got Assassin's Creed 2 Deluxe, which was actually pretty damn good, and Assassin's Creed Revelations. Brotherhood is not on the list. God knows why that is. The discount's not particularly brilliant on most of these games, I'm afraid, so unless you are wanting the Assassin's Creed experience right the hell now, you can probably wait. Mortal Kombat 10. This did not launch in a good state. Lots of problems with this one, including with the online mode in particular. It's not that it's a bad game, it's actually a pretty damn fun fighter with a fun single-player mode, a good selection of characters, as well as towers and challenge modes and all sorts of pieces of content, as well as 3 ways to experience each character with 3 different fighting styles, which is very, very good indeed. But the game is unfortunately still suffering from problems. Lots of people complaining about issues after huge patches and problems with the multiplayer. The netcode is, in many respects, highly unreliable. So if you want to play online, your mileage is going to vary significantly on PC. They have not resolved all of these issues yet. It's kind of getting there, but it isn't there. It's that simple. So unless you're absolutely desperate to get a hold of this game, I personally wouldn't bother. Wait for a bigger discount in another sale, or indeed wait for them to actually fix the online multiplayer. One of the two, preferably both. And finally, Goat Simulator. Okay, so the original Goat Simulator I pretty much despised. There was very little to do. It was a sandbox without any sand. It was a bunch of little set-piece jokes, for the most part. Wasn't a great fan of it. Though I will say that since then, the MMO Simulator and Goat Z have added significant content in there. MMO Simulator is actually a free expansion, which means that there's a lot more to do. It's still mostly a deliberately buggy set of set-piece jokes with occasional physics-based nonsense, but it is certainly a lot more fun to play now. It's actually got content, whereas the original was like, that's it? You're making us pay for this? Well, thankfully, that's no longer the case. So, yeah, why not? You know, and for that price, you might want to play around with Goat MMO Simulator just a little bit. It's a lot better than it was. I'll give it credit for that. It's still a little bit lol-so-random for my tastes, but hey, there you go. Alright, folks, that is me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the Salebox, and I will see you next time.